All right, it is about 2 minutes after 2 p.m., and we had a few more folks join us, so we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who don't know me yet or who missed, my name is James Norte. I am the proud CEO for San Antonio for Growth on the East Side. And thank you for taking the time to join for our proposal meeting. I'm going to go ahead and just note a few things at the top end, and then I'll go ahead and lay out our agenda. First, this meeting is being recorded, and so our plan will be to post this meeting up on our website at the same website where you found the Zoom information. On top of that, we are also intending to post any Q&A we get via email up on the website just so that everyone has the same information. All right, let's go ahead and now, Shamari, can you go ahead and enable my permissions?
Yes. You are now the host, so you should have permissions for everything now.
Thank you. Okay, folks, if you can see my screen, just go ahead and give me a thumbs up or put yes in the chat. Excellent. And so, as I mentioned before, this is our proposal meeting. Just want to lay out a very brief agenda. We will have a little bit of an overview, and then I want to give a little bit of background on our nonprofit organization, and then this project in terms of where we're going. I want to give an overview of our RFQ, and then certainly our timeline is laid out in the RFQ, but most importantly, this is our opportunity to answer any questions, things that maybe were ambiguous or not clear, any technicalities, and our goal is to make sure that everyone has access to the same information. When we put together RFQ, we always think we're clear, but there's certainly things we've missed or didn't think about. So by all means, we want to make sure that everyone has access to the same information. And then as you have questions during the presentation, by all means, you can always put them in the chat. But my goal is to get through this preliminary information as quickly as possible, and then really have an open Q&A session. A little bit about SAGE. We are a 501c3 economic development nonprofit. We've been around for over 25 years, and so certainly founded in 1998. And our story really is that we see the east side of San Antonio as absolutely beautiful. And to the extent we also acknowledge the reality that with our proud history and culture is buttressed by the reality of historical disinvestment and concentrated poverty. And so, to the extent what we are trying to do as an organization is celebrate the diversity, the sense of pride, the culture, the history of our community by being honest about the neglect, but not staying in a state of defeatism, but thinking through is how do we move forward collectively. And so just a little bit about us. If you were to research what is the history of the organization, we were charged with these 7 objectives: facilitating business development, generating jobs, being a planning agency, coordinating the development of brick and mortar projects, building economic development, finding investors, but most importantly, developing strong, positive relationships with our community. Everything we do is based on how we can listen and learn from the community we serve. I'll go ahead and note that we'll also put these slides on the website as well. And so it'll be in the video, but also have these slides separately. Our mission then is to promote the economic development and cultural vitality of the east side of San Antonio. It flows naturally from those articles of incorporation. And our service area has largely expanded. If you've worked in San Antonio for some time, you may have been familiar with the Promise Zone, about a 22 square mile area designated by the Obama administration, close to Central East Side. If you can see my mouse, I'm waving over downtown. This purple area is what was known as the Promise Zone. It was a 10-year period where the organization in the city were eligible for grants that would allow for more favorable status for targeted investment. We certainly saw improvements along criminal justice and education, but there's still certainly enough work to go along. We have now expanded our service area to cover a 75 square mile area, which includes the cities of Converse, Windcrest, and Kirby. But to the extent we still see this purple area as for East Side. Part of the reason why we expanded was in part to engage with a greater number of government bodies, but also the East Side isn't just a geographic location. For our board of directors in our community, the East Side is also people. There are folks who grew up in this core East Side, but have since moved Northeast or deeper East or Southeast. And so we want to collect all of that history, all of that community. So a little bit of some demographic information. Surprisingly, we have almost 6,000 businesses in the East Side and almost a quarter million residents. People don't always think about that. I know there's significant perceptions that can be an impediment to development, but we counter perceptions with facts. Even though the community we serve is 20% African American, it is not and has never been predominantly African American. It is largely Latino, but we do our work based on coalition building. And so you won't be surprised with some of the disparities I put on the screen when it comes to median household income, unemployment rates, and poverty rates. There's certainly work for improvement, and the goal is projects like the one we're about to discuss can help us move the needle on these data points. And so a little bit about what we do before we get into the RFQ is we have three main priorities. Everything we do to support our mission of community economic development and cultural vitality flows and falls into these two buckets of supporting small business, preserving the East Side culture and heritage, and advocating for community development without displacement. And so our vision is to think through some of the issues that many small businesses speak to us about being able to open up a new or existing business, but acknowledging there are barriers such as finding a pristine location, access to capital, and finding terms that make sense, either from a lender or from a landlord. And so here on your screen is Mercado Roma. It is a wonderful public market complex in DF, Mexico, and it plays into our strategy of what Sage ultimately hopes to do, which is to be a player in the real estate space by acquiring properties. Ultimately, our goal as a landlord would be to have properties that would allow for small businesses to have a mix of retail and restaurant while also allowing some office and eventually even some residential live workspaces. And then as the landlord, Sage can have some options. It can choose to develop a market rent to accrue more earned revenue for the nonprofit. But our preference is actually to think through, can we as a landowner who doesn't have the burden of some taxes, then pass on those savings to our tenants in the form of below market rents while attracting foot traffic for the East Side. And so this is going to take a collaborative effort. We certainly can't do this by ourselves, which is why we come to this RFQ and why we're so excited with the number of individuals who are here. So I just want to give a brief overview of the RFQ. And so I'm going to stop this presentation for a second, and then I'm going to shift to the actual RFQ. This document is available on our website, easy enough to download. It was opened up on August 18th. I've already laid out some of the background, but I want to just go through. I know you all can read, but I just want to make sure I verbalize that what we hope is through these tasks, we are looking for a community informed business plan. This is a planning grant that was funded by Health and Human Services. And the goal here is to work with the community to create a public market complex as an anchor for future development, entertainment for the East Side. And so some illustrative examples include Boston's Faneuil Hall, Columbus's North Market. I mentioned Mercado Roma before, Austin's Fairground, and Houston's Finn Hall. There are some examples in San Antonio as well, but not a marquee one for the East Side. And so we're looking for a qualified consultant or perhaps a consultant who works with a team of sub-consultants to develop this feasibility study, this business plan. And then it is our hope that in the very near future, as early as next year, we will immediately be eligible to apply to the same Department of Health and Human Services for an implementation grant to actually work with a team, including engineers, to build and construct this facility. You will see that for the scopes of work, it includes reviewing previously published community plans and then working to look for what is the appropriate market demand for this type of development, and then what would the right product mix look like in terms of what spaces are available, thinking through what type of retail services might make sense. And then to the extent it makes the work easier, what we've gone ahead and done is this community is notoriously overstudied. And so to the extent on our website, in fact, let me go ahead and pull that up right now. If you were to go to our About section, scroll down to Community Plans, we have gone ahead and pulled up the most relevant of the plans dating back from 2003 when the city worked with the county and the San Antonio Spurs entertainment franchise to go ahead and develop the area that's now the Frost Bank Center and the surrounding area. And then there's been different plans done by the city and SAGE. So some of this work is already existing. One chief concern from the community is that we are so good about putting together a plan, but then it stays on a shelf. For SAGE, that's unacceptable. We seek to implement the current existing plan. So I would highly encourage you, as you do this work, to go to review the work that's already been laid down so it can not just stay on the shelf, then come to fruition. We also hope that this consultant will be a true partner. We are not necessarily looking to have someone who is going to dictate. We're also not looking for someone who's going to be completely submissive. We want a partner who can think through what we haven't thought before, who can leverage their own experience to help us in this space as we mature and develop, but also who's not afraid to offer perhaps solutions that weren't discussed before, even pushback as needed, because we think a partner who is able to help Sage improve not only as a leader on the East Side, but also engage in the community to assist with those community engagement efforts, whether it be surveys, interviews, community meetings. We want this to be a true team effort. And so part of the task will be to review existing work, help us as we host town halls and community surveys to gather input, and then from there, conduct an economic analysis and think through what is a preferred site or sites for the project. Thinking through some concept designs that help people understand what this could look like, because all of this work lays the groundwork to eventually implement and construct this facility. And then because we're so community minded, we envision that there will be certainly at least two rounds, perhaps an initial round and then a final round, where that latter round is community input based on any preliminary concepts that are done. You can't make anyone happy, and I encourage us to be careful not to overpromise. But I do think Eastside residents are hungry for solutions. They're hungry for options that make sure they have the same quality of life of any other part of San Antonio. As the seventh largest city, we have high standards and we expect as much. And so I've gone ahead and listed some of the deliverables here, but ultimately it will be the board of directors for the organization who will pick among at least three options for a final concept. We will then present this to the whole community. We will also present to some of our partners, including the city of San Antonio. And then we will very quickly seek to apply for implementation grant. So we're just being transparent about what we're doing here, and we're being transparent about why we're doing it. The submittal requirements, as I'm sure, are pretty straightforward. It involves a simple letter of interest, going through the contact information for if there is a fault information or something is unclear, that we can go ahead and reach to a single point person, but thinking through what is the approach? How do you, as a consultant, think through community economic development? How are you understanding the history of San Antonio's East Side, and what is your approach to the project? That can include anything and everything from not just your internal project management methodology, but also thinking through your external work or how Sage can be a better community partner. We want you to identify your community team so we have a sense of the breadth and scope and experience. And so to keep this as concise as possible, we're asking to have a one-page resume per team member, but at least have a minimum of one paragraph for every team member. And then to the extent that if you have any team members who have ties to San Antonio, specifically to East Side, please be sure to accent that as well. And then to the extent we want to hear about your experience, to the extent that you've done similar work in the past, this is not designed to be exclusive, but it is designed to help us get a better understanding of your approach. If you have an approach, we want to know to what extent has the prior work you've done um, sustained or at least resembled that approach. And so our evaluation criteria is pretty straightforward as well. We're going to largely be looking at your qualifications in terms of your prior work, the team you've assembled, but we also want to know to what extent, how are you approaching this? How are you being creative? What is your vision? And we want to think through your execution. In terms of submission, we have a due date of 3 p.m. on September 19th. That's 10 days from now. And then our process is a little bit different than what you might see from a city or some other governmental entity. Typically, they may ask that you submit a printed copy, but we are going to ask for electronic copies only. And so, again, if you go to our Sage website and if you go to under programs, hover your mouse to the public market complex, then to the request for qualifications, you will see a green apply here button. And so my recommendation with these things is to always do it in a separate document in Word first, because computers have a way of being problematic. I'll put it gently. But the goal here is to streamline the information that we have to contact, and then your actual document will be uploaded in a PDF. We kindly ask that you keep it to a maximum of 20 pages because we also want to understand how well can you be concise in communicating a lot of information. And so this is another way of kind of getting at a sense of, even if you have all the experience in the world, can you communicate it in a way that compels um, a sense of authority, but also inspires a sense of brevity, accuracy, and simplicity. I think at this point, I'm going to go back to our timetable. And so this is a pre-proposal meeting we're having right here. For those of you who happen to join after 2 o'clock, this meeting is being recorded. We're going to post it on our website. We're going to post this PowerPoint on our website. Our deadline for questions, which are always welcomed at communications@sagesa.org, and I'll put that email address on the website shortly, is September 16th. And then I mentioned that 3 p.m. submittal deadline via that link on the website. Our goal is to then have our internal team review applications to make sure they're complete. We will then hopefully begin the interview process around October 19th, approximately 30 days from our due date. And we hope to have a partner selected by November. And so our goal is to hit the ground running. We understand that because of the holidays, we might have to think through alternative timelines, which is why we hopefully are hoping to have a consultant selected before the Thanksgiving holiday. That way, to the extent that the schedule aligns and work commences as early as January 2026, we can hit the ground running. And so I went through a lot of information incredibly quickly. So I want to pause here and now open up the floor for questions. I'm wondering if perhaps the best and easiest way to do this is if you are on the Zoom and you hover over to the React in the middle of the screen, you can go ahead and click raise hand, and then we can call folks from there. And then to the extent that folks are on a call, please feel free to go ahead and chime in. What questions can we answer? All right, I see a hand. It says Zoom user on my screen, but that's you. So go ahead, go for it.
Good afternoon, and thank you for that presentation, James. So this is Dwayne Robinson. My question for you is so you said that after the study is presented, then Sage will then turn around and apply for an implementation grant.
Correct.
So once you receive the implementation grant, will you then the entity that did the feasibility work, the firm that gets selected, will you open it back up on the implementation grant side, or will the awardee of this portion of the grant be considered, or the recipient of the implementation grant portion?
Thank you, Dwayne. It's an excellent question, and it's good to see you. Thanks for being on this call. The short answer is we will open up. But I want to put some context. This grant is funded by Health and Human Services and is purely for planning. We are not allowed to spend any of these funds for construction. That said, because these are federal funds, we want to have an open and fair process as possible. In my mind, it seems to me naturally that whichever firm or firms are involved in the planning process would probably have somewhat of an advantage for the construction phase. But I also understand that not every firm who is in a position to do economic analyses or architectural design can do construction. And so for that reason, we're going to open it up. And it could be, because it's a separate grant, assuming we're awarded, so making some assumptions here, it could be then that whichever firm is in a position to win that implementation RFQ, in my mind, it would make a lot of sense to work with the planning partner. At this stage, I am not ready to say that anyone who's selected for planning is somehow disqualified or somehow can't work with multiple teams, because we're not there yet. And to the extent we want to think through what maximizes opportunity, because a firm may not be selected for the planning grant, but we want to make sure they have an equal opportunity to apply for the construction component and get awarded without any bias or disfavor. Does that answer your question, Dwayne? Wonderful. Thank you, sir. Don't be shy, y'all. I don't bite, and it's possible that I explained everything so well there are no other questions, but sometimes I miss a few things. So um yes, please, Kathleen.
Hi, James. I'm in transit, so I hope you can hear me okay on
I can hear you great.
my phone. Great. I had a question in the RFQ. It talked a little bit about some portion of the grant funds being held back for SAGE to help support community engagement.
That's correct.
Can you explain how you envision that collaboration working, or what elements of the scope may be covered by SAGE for engagement, and what expectations you have of a consultant?
Certainly, it's a great question. And so, to an extent, depending on who the consultant is, some firms may already have a public engagement unit, and then some firms may have no public engagement unit. And so, we have deliberately left that somewhat broad. But it is my expectation that for the most part, SAGE will be involved in the public facing work. I'll give you an example. We know that we want to have some community town halls based on getting some information that is depicted, whether it be any conceptual renderings. And so, to the extent Sage would publicize those meetings through our newsletters and our website, and then because we already have rapport with the community, we believe they're more likely to come to an event if it's coming from Sage. We know that not every community member has the highest regard for every developer. And so, to the extent it is our expectation that while we're working in partnership with the consultant, Sage is the outward facing lead. That said, there are some teams who already have public engagement departments. And so there might be a opportunity to work closely with them where they might have recommendations of here is our best practice for a survey, or to the extent, here's how we typically run the town hall. but we still want Sage to be the face of organizing it. And so we've deliberately let that be vague for that purpose, to be as inclusive as possible. But if one doesn't have a public engagement unit, that is not to be precluded from this opportunity. Sage has plenty of experience issuing surveys, running town halls, but we would want your input. If there is certain data, for example, that's not clear or has not been studied on, and to the extent that Sage can help either garner that information from our government or community partners, or to the extent there are best practices from other cities, we want this to feel like a true partnership, and we want to work with you to kind of think through what is the best format to avoid participation fatigue, to help people where there are, and to do it in a way that's also cost effective. Kathleen, does that answer your question? Is there anything further that's unclear?
Yes, thank you so much.
Sure, sure. And then to maybe as a follow-up to further explain, the grant is for $150,000, and of which by getting some market information, we've estimated that the cost can range anywhere from 60 to 95,000. This depends on the work, it depends on the team. And so we've left that somewhat loose as well. And so that third portion of that 55,000 is designed for Sage's portion of the cost. That said, as a nonprofit, we also understand that costs escalate. Sometimes things don't always go with the plan. And so I don't want to make any promises. I want to be clear about what our limit is at 95,000, but also understand that sometimes circumstances arise that are beyond one's control. As a nonprofit, we're accustomed to having to raise money sometimes to fill a gap. And we have strong government community partners who want to see this project come to fruition and will help us fill that gap as necessary. Great question, Kathleen. Hey, Ashley, I see your hand. Go for it.
Hi. I have a question about the sort of process and deliverables. It seems that your partner will work with you to look at a variety of sites and potentially sort of rank them according to various recommendations and suitability. And then the part of the deliverable is conceptual design. Is the idea that there would be multiple concept designs for the different sites, or a sort of overall programming or approach that could be deployed on various sites that are yet to be determined? I guess how finalized will the site selection be during this process, or based upon the outcome of the sort of, multiple options in this study?
So it's a good question, Ashley. Thank you for asking it. In my mind, it was more of the latter. But that said, there are some sites that might be conducive to a smaller footprint, but a more vertical, perhaps a three-story concept. And then there are some sites that have massive potential for use, where to the extent for outdoor entertainment and dining, it might not be necessary to get even to a second floor. And so it is not necessarily the case that the same concept has to be used at every site. Although it probably naturally is the assumption that the core design, the core elements would hopefully be applied at every site. But it would be interesting to see one site that perhaps is one story, but fairly massive in terms of the square footage, and another site that's smaller, but taller. And so to the extent, both of those would be options that we could present to the community and then have the community weigh in and what they want to see.
Right. So the idea is that the final deliverable is still probably a set of options as
That's right.
one final.
That's exactly right. But we still want your recommendation. So to the extent of the set of options, if there's a clearly, well, we want a clearly preferred choice, but ultimately it'll be the board who'll decide which one.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
I could ask another question.
Please do. Please do. I'm not a shy guy, so go for it.
Do you have a sense of the number of community engagement events that should be planned, or is that part of our proposal to suggest a sort of timeline and flow of touch points with the community?
More of the latter, but to the extent I can tell you what the minimum would be. Certainly, to the extent that from a town hall perspective, I would expect certainly at least two, one for an initial and then a second one based on the feedback. The thing we need to think through is if there are too many events, you're going to get the sense of fatigue, and that may not be the best use. But depending on if there was a idea of multiple locations, it could be the case that one would have a town meeting close to each location. That being said, although we have a large service area, um, without putting my foot on the scale at all, I could see where someone could make the case that to the extent that you have a greater concentration of people closer towards the core near the Dignawood and Denver Heights neighborhoods, that could certainly make sense. But we also don't want to exclude the larger service area, perhaps closer to the areas near Windcrest or near Kirby. And so thinking through what makes sense is also looking at virtual options, looking using surveys, but I'm curious on one's methodology. I know we've worked with some firms where they do more of a individual interview process. And even though it is more time consuming, it's certainly rich with information. But we also want to make sure that people who want opportunity to weigh in feel like they've had every chance to do so.
Thanks.
Of course. While we're waiting, Shamari, are there any questions that were directed only to the Sage web host through private message?
No, not yet.
Okay, great. All right. I see a hand. Kathleen, yes, please.
Hello, me again. Um, quick follow-up on Ashley's first question about
Yeah.
site selection. I imagine that prior to going after the second round for HHS grant, that the purchase of whatever property is recommended and approved by the community would occur. Do you have a sense of if oftentimes federal grants don't allow for property acquisition, if Sage will plan on purchasing that property after this feasibility study takes place? And if so, do you have kind of ballpark budget for the property acquisition side of it?
Great question. So the short answer is yes. Prior to applying for an implementation grant, kind of the phase two, the federal government requires site control. And so in this instance, we would need, Sage would need to own the land or have some type of arrangement where, for example, it could be city-owned land that the city never agrees to sell, but because of this process, the community and our consultant partner has said this is the best place for a public market complex. If we were to have an arrangement to lease that property and work with the property to still construct a public market complex, we would still need to demonstrate some level of site control. And so then it is Sage responsibility, perhaps thinking through what can be financed through tax increment, reinvestment zone financing, or perhaps thinking through other private sector partners. But that would be Sage responsibility to either purchase the land outright or develop some understanding where we can maintain site control before we could apply for the implementation grant.
Hey, James, this is Dick Lee with Gensler. Does that hold true for county as well, not just city?
If it is county-owned land, by all means, yes, that is still true. And that's not to suggest that this couldn't be outside the city, but in the county. And so to the extent um, the good news is we have great relationships with almost all of our governmental bodies. We still have some work to do in the Congress Kirby area and the Windcrest area, but largely, I think any governmental body would see a project like this as a massive win. Every conversation we've had, if you know about the history of the East Side, you know that this is something that is desperately needed and wanted and desired. And so, although even if we don't have the full budget to cover the cost, to your earlier question, Kathleen, Sage intends to raise the money, and this business study gives us the credibility to raise that money from both governmental, foundation, and private sector partners. Great question, Kathleen, and thanks for that follow-up, Dick. Appreciate it. Any other questions?
Just one more, James. It sounds like you guys will go through the calls here and then probably make some decisions fairly quickly. How do you see the process beyond that date that you have on the RFQ?
Yes, and so to the extent that we intend to immediately, as soon as applications come in on the 19th, start the review process, we want to be in the interview process well within that October 19th timeline. And then we ultimately would like to select a consultant partner around November before Thanksgiving. I know that sometimes things change depending on timeline, depending on even our partner who is applying for the work may have other projects that make it challenging. So this is an RFQ, we want the best partner. And so even then it could be if the best partner is tied up through this year, we would have some flexibility to kind of make sure that we can align. But what I will share is in my ideal world, we have at least started work by January 2026. And then just putting my cards on the table, I don't want to rush this, but if we were able to finish by March 2026, that would immediately put us in the right time period to not only secure the site, but apply for the 2026 CED grant. We never know for sure when they're going to open it. Usually in most years it's opened around the May period, and then the deadline is close to July. I will share in 2025, without being political or having any commentary, there was a little bit of a delay. And just to be fairly honest with you, the application for 2025 opened September 3rd and was closed September 8th. And I'll just say that's enough about that. So it is our intention, and to be clear, we ended up applying for that grant. We had 5 days to apply for an unrelated project, but our commitment is because we don't know what the federal government might do. This process is statutorily authorized, so it's going to be open, but we don't know how much of a window. We are navigating some of those circumstances and those politics, but we
Sure.
want to make sure that we're ready to apply in 2026. And then there's never a guarantee we're going to get it, but we've applied for this grant in 2014. We've applied in 2024 with some success. And so our
Okay.
hope is then, even if we are not successful in 2026, we would immediately apply again in 2027. We are committed to this work. And then if we're not able to have it funded through the federal government, we'll try perhaps through the county, the city, other partners, but we want to see this become a reality.
Perfect. Thank you.
I don't see any other questions, but I'm a big believer that sometimes things take time. And so what I will do is I'm going to commit to just stay on the line for the next 10 minutes or so. Folks, you're welcome to stay on the line if you want to go on mute or turn off your camera. But if you sign off, this recording up until 2:50 or so will be posted on our website. We'll probably put it on YouTube with a link. And so there's no need to further stay on. But then way, if someone comes on later and asks a question, everyone has access to the same information. And as I mentioned before, we'll put the slide presentation I shared on the website as well. And then to the extent if there are other suggestions you all have in terms of how we can make sure information is disseminated fairly and clearly, we're always looking for ways to improve and get better. So we welcome that without any judgment. No one's going to be dinged because they had a recommendation how we could be clearer or better. This is the first of what we hope would be many, many, many RFQs. It's not related to this one, but some of you know that in 2025, we were awarded a $2 million Department of Transportation planning study. So that'll be coming through. We just got close to finalizing that with the Texas Department of Transportation. So be on the lookout for that project in probably the next couple of months. We're hoping to get that issued pretty soon, but we know that we want to develop this work. We know we want to build relationships with the development community, and we see our work with you all as integral to developing promises and to deliver those promises for the East Side.
That sounds great, James. Just curious on that
Yeah.
On that transportation study. Is that for the Silver Line going through?
Not quite. And so I'm going to discuss a little bit about this, but to the extent I'm happy that we can take any further questions offline. But if you were to go to our website, let me start by sharing my screen. Let me do that first. Let me show you what we have in mind. So if you're at our website and you hover your mouse over to programs, and just below this planning market complex is one called Reconnecting Communities Project. And long story short, while the federal highways that bind the core East Side along I-35 to the north, I-37 to the west, and I-10 to the east were designed to facilitate connection and commerce. The unintended consequence was that they become barriers to jobs in other parts of the community. And so we were awarded a $2 million transportation grant to study. This is another planning grant, and the requirement for the federal match is only 80%. So it'd be a total of 2.5 million to study the potential burying and capping of 4 areas of 3 interstates. And so we will have a similar RFQ process. I know it will be far more robust, probably including more civil engineer work and maybe even to the extent it might require a little bit of environmental impact. And then to the extent, I should also share that the city is undergoing a conversation related to the Spurs move to downtown with Project Marvel. And the city was also awarded this same grant, but they are focused on building a land bridge. And so to the extent we work closely with the city, but on this grant, there are 2 separate grant projects.
That's great. Thank you.
Of course. Well, we went through that information a lot faster than I thought, and your questions were on point and succinct. And so, to the extent I'm happy to keep the line open, let's go from 10 minutes from this point. Let's go from 2:45 to 2:55. And like I said before, you're happy to stay in the line if you want, or if you want to put on another screen and get some work done. And then, unless there's another question, we will close this meeting at 2:55 p.m. All right, everyone. I have waited 10 minutes to see if we get any additional questions or folks coming to the call late. We have not. And so this will go ahead and conclude our call. I want to thank you again for taking the time to participate. As I mentioned before, this meeting was recorded. We'll go ahead and have it posted on our website. And then if there are further questions that come up, feel free to email communications@sagesa.org up until the 16th. Then we'll have our quiet zone until the applications are due on the 19th at 3 p.m. Thank you again and good luck. Have a good one, everyone.